according to John. Le dimanche matin très tôt, Marie de Magdala se rendit au tombeau. Il faisait encore très sombre. Elle vit que la pierre fermant l'entrée du sépulcre avait été ôtée. Alors elle courut prévenir Simon-Pierre et l'autre disciple, celui que Jésus aimait. Ensemble, on a enlevé le Seigneur.
Pierre sortit donc avec l'autre disciple et se rendirent tous deux au tombeau. Ils couraient tous les deux ensemble, mais l'autre disciple, plus rapide que Pierre, le distança et arriva le premier au tombeau. En se penchant, il vit les linges funéraires par terre, mais il n'entra pas.
Simon-Pierre, qui le suivait, arriva alors. Il entra dans le tombeau, vit les linges qui étaient par terre et le linge qui avait enveloppé la tête de Jésus, non pas avec des linges funéraires, mais roulés à part à sa place.
Alors l'autre disciple, celui qui est arrivé le premier au tombeau, est allé aussi à l'intérieur. Il vit et il crut. Ils ne comprennent pas encore l'écriture que Jésus devait ressusciter des morts.
So then the two of them returned to where they were staying, but Mary remained outside the tomb crying. As she cried, she bent down to look into the tomb. There she saw two angels dressed in white, seated where the body of Jesus had been, one at the head and one at the foot. The angels asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" She replied, As soon as she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't know it was Jesus.
Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for?"
Thinking he was the gardener, Mary replied, Jesus simply replied, "Mary."
Then she returned to him and said, The Gospel of Christ.
Thanks be to God.
Well, here we are. We have arrived at the most important celebration of the Christian year, Easter Sunday, the resurrection of our Lord. And yet, this is not a celebration in the same sense as, say, Christmas Eve. So, Christmas Eve and Easter are both joyful celebrations, but it seems to me the joy in each of them is a bit different from the other. So the joy of Christmas Eve is more like that of a party, because Christmas Eve is basically a birthday party for Jesus. The joy of Easter, on the other hand, may be more like the joy that comes with a big discovery, the profound joy of finding a great truth. So what is that truth? Well, simply this, that Jesus of Nazareth died, fully died. Then, roughly 40 hours later, he was raised back to life. And we call this the resurrection. So a problem comes, though, in that this resurrection is way beyond our comprehension. In fact, Jesus' resurrection is so far beyond our comprehension that for 2,000 years, people have tried to make it comprehensible, right? And they've done this by reducing it to categories that we understand. To understandable categories, reducing what happened to Jesus to ideas and frameworks and categories of thought that make sense to us in our limited human understanding. So, for instance, C.S. Lewis records a conversation he once had with someone whom he does not name. But in the conversation, this person said to Lewis, well, the importance of the resurrection is that it gives evidence that human personality survives death. Really? This is an example of reducing the resurrection by making it in some way simply more comprehensible through the categories and experiences we already have. So, I would call this an example of reducing the resurrection by making the resurrection manageable. Manageable for our limited ways of thinking. But the last thing we need to do with the resurrection is make it manageable. Famous English writer Dorothy Sayers once wrote this: "To make Jesus' resurrection into something that neither startles, nor shocks, nor terrifies, nor excites, is to crucify the Son of God afresh." But the inclination of our human condition is, though, to do precisely that, to remove the startle, to remove the shock and awe and incomprehensibility of the story, of the claim, by softening it into something more manageable to us. And this removes the excitement as well. It removes the excitement of this news, and the amazement that there is a God who does this. But God's action in returning Jesus of Nazareth to life from death was not something that fits into, as I said, our existing experiences and categories. Rather, God's action of resurrection was intended in part by God to blow apart our safe and secure frameworks for how we see the world. John Updike, some of you will know that name. He was a famous American author, died in 2009. Here's how Updike describes the reality of the resurrection from part of his poem, 7 Stanzas. That should be at Easter. 7 stanzas at Easter. Make no mistake. If he rose at all, it was as his body. If the cell's dissolution did not reverse, the molecules reknit, the amino acids rekindle, the church will fall. The same hinged thumbs and toes, the same valved heart that pierced, died, withered, paused, then regathered. Out of enduring might, new strength to enclose. Let us not mock God with metaphor, analogy, sidestepping, transcendence, making of the event a parable, a sign painted in the faded credulity of earlier ages. Let us walk through the door. I like that phrase. I really like that phrase. Let us walk through the door. From one way of seeing the world in which everything is merely natural and does not permit resurrection, through the door to a very different way of seeing the world in which the world is God's and subject to God's action outside of our boxes and categories. Not God subject to our control and our management, though human history is full of such efforts. In fact, whenever we as humanity try to manage or control anything that is greater than us, it doesn't go well. Take, for instance, our desire to manage and control nature. We've pretty much made a big mess of it. We've had some amazing successes from a technological perspective, like the incredible dike system in the Netherlands, or the Hoover Dam in Nevada, or the control of atomic fusion for nuclear power. But such examples lead humanity so often into the arrogance of thinking we can actually manage and control nature. The climate change, though, is showing that humanity has fooled itself. We are not capable of managing or controlling nature. Nature is just so much greater than us. Even more so, we cannot manage or control God or God's ways. So we fool ourselves if we think we can manage the resurrection story by reinterpreting it in ways that keep the story feeling safe for us by fitting it into our categories. The resurrection is not a safe story. It is not a controllable story. It is a story of an actual event in time and space that reveals a stunning God for whom the power of love and redemption is greater than the fundamental forces of the creation that God created. I'm going to repeat that because I think that's so important. The resurrection reveals a stunning God for whom the power of love and redemption is greater than the fundamental forces of God's own creation. The resurrection of Jesus reveals a God who will rule over his own creation to show that new life and redemption and salvation are indeed possible and will indeed be the case in God's own time. In the resurrection, we see a foretaste, a sign pointing forward to God's new creation and who this incredible God is. So, there is an awe-inspiring, a world-inverting radicalness to what God has done this week, in Holy Week. A couple days ago, on the cross, the creator of the universe showed us what true power is about. True power as self-sacrificing agape love, by becoming a servant to others, even to the point of death for them. Then, just a couple days later at the resurrection, we see the flip side of that divine power. God's ability to rule over creation. Again, not as an exercise for himself, for his own benefit, but as an exercise and a power for the benefit of his creation. To show that death and nothingness is not the final frontier, but rather renewal and life. God's use of his own power in the resurrection is not saying, see this resurrection thing? Don't mess with me, because that's what I can do. That's what I'm capable of. That is not the message here. God's use of divine power here in the resurrection is saying, see this resurrection thing? Trust me. Trust me, because this is what I will do for you too and for all creation. And so I imagine God saying these words to us. You cannot control me, but you can trust me, because I am the creator. I am the God of resurrection. I am the God of love and ultimate redemption. So there are consequences that flow from this. And these are wrapped up in the word gospel, good news. In other words, from the resurrection comes the gospel. And here's how I like to describe the gospel for today. That through the life and death and resurrection of Emmanuel, God with us in Jesus of Nazareth, God is at work, healing, reconciling, and saving the world. And here's the exciting part. You and I are invited to be part of that work as both recipients of and co-workers in that healing, renewing, redeeming work of God. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that incredible? Incredible. That you and I are invited by God to be both these recipients and co-workers in God's work. And this is a vision of life that has captured my heart and mind, and to which I have committed my life. And this is why, as followers of Christ, we persevere in ministry and mission. We persevere in serving as God's hands and feet and voices in our deeply wounded world. In our human frailty, it is so easy to submit to what in some contexts is called compassion fatigue. Or we could call it to ministry and mission fatigue. We can so easily be overwhelmed by the continuous pain and demand and work needed around us. And so in our human condition, it's just so easy to say, I can't do it anymore. And so give up and withdraw to our own little corner of the world, looking after just myself or perhaps also my loved ones, those who are close to me. But in the resurrection, we see God's faithful, never-ending commitment to healing the world, to bringing salvation in its fullest, broadest biblical sense. And that is why gospel people, resurrection people, do not succumb to ministry and mission fatigue and withdraw. Times of rest and restoration are essential. I'm not denying that. Times of rest and restoration are essential. And sometimes We can go to another extreme of saying, just pushing ourselves so far that we wear ourselves out, and we end up being no good to anybody, including ourselves. So those times of restoration are necessary, and even Jesus took those for himself. But retirement from ministry and mission? No. As long as we are breathing and conscious, we can be creatively serving God's work in blessing others and in God's gospel ministry. So let me conclude. There are so many facets to the resurrection, so many implications of the resurrection, that for 2,000 years, countless writings have been written in countless languages on all continents as Christ's followers have tried to understand and work out for their lives and for their context the implications of this moment in history. In our world right now, where so much seems to be going wrong, I want simply to say this: that through the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, God is inviting us, you and me, to commit or to recommit our lives to God's gospel vision for us and for the world. So I invite you to stand, and we are going to, I invite you to join with me in this affirmation, this resurrection affirmation in Philippians chapter 2. Jesus, though being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something